There's driving, which is getting in a car and going out shopping. Then there's motoring, which is going out in an MG just because you want to do it. Because there's a blue sky and the sun, and you could go along, and the wind in your hair. It's fantastic. That's the difference between driving and motoring. It's called MG.
It's not just a car. An MG represents a lifestyle, a part of many people's identity. Enthusiasts spend hours and days with their MGs to restore them and take them all over the world. With over 60 clubs around the world that drive their restored MGs on different country roads, there is one man that stands out. An MG owner by accident and a traveler by choice. Roy Locock's story is inspiring and motivating at all levels.
My relationship with MG came about very much by accident. I was driving home from the office on my last day of work, and there was a garage which I passed regularly. And in the showroom there was always a sports car. And I decided that evening I'd stop and take a look. And they had an MG and a Sunbeam. And I decided there and then that, having wanted a sports car for many years, that at last I would actually buy one. If I didn't buy one then, I probably never would.
MGs have always been accessible to all kinds of people. They're aspirational, but they're ascertainable as well. Anyone can go and buy an MG. If an MG is on the road and being enjoyed, that's the most important thing.
When one buys a car, one buys a car. But when one invests in an MG, it becomes a part of your story. Most people who own MGs often tend to associate the car with their precious life moments. Who knew that a random car purchase would become one of the greatest motoring stories of the modern world?
Whilst I was working on the car, that my neighbour came over and struck up a conversation and asked me what I was going to do when I finished the car. I was a little tired and frustrated with some of the work that was going on at the time and wasn't really in a jolly mood. So I said that I was going to drive it around the world. What else would I do? And he retorted, "You can't drive this type of car around the world." 12 weeks later, I left the UK and embarked on what turned out to be one of the greatest adventures of my life. And that was in the MG.
Roy and his midget, which he fondly named Bridget, travelled more than 39,000 miles and 27 countries. His travel took him across Europe into Asia, where he drove through countries such as Turkey, Iran, Pakistan and India, before circumnavigating Australia, and then taking the Pan-American Highway from Argentina up till Canada.
I was obviously a little bit worried when he mentioned he was going to go through places like Iran and kind of near the Afghanistan border, and then parts of South America as well. I was a little bit worried, but it's what he wanted to do, so I'm not going to stop him doing what he wanted. It was his passion. So
I left the UK on my journey in June 2008 and basically drove initially across Europe. So I arrived at the Turkish border and somewhat apprehensively, because it was the first international border I was crossing where I needed a visa, special paperwork for the car. I arrived at immigration, and as I did so, the door flew open and stood there was a man in very, very smart uniform, which is not typical of customs people. So I assumed that he was a more important official, and he looked really quite perplexed. He looked straight at me, and I thought, I've already done something wrong. I must have come up the wrong entrance. I've certainly done something. He strode across to the car and bent down to the window because I had the roof on. And he said, "Mr. Bond, James Bond," with which a beaming smile crossed his face, and I realised he'd picked up on the closed circuit television the number plate of my car, which of course says Spy.
Roy was now in unfamiliar territory, but this was just the start of an epic adventure. After Turkey came Iran.
So Iran had made me realise that this was going to be a journey of unusual experiences. So I decided that I would keep a blog for the whole thing, mainly as a memoir for myself, so that when I return I would remember what I'd done and where I'd been, and have a proper chronological diary of the whole thing. So I started to write a blog called Bridget the Midget.
After exciting experiences in the rugged and unpredictable terrains of Iran and Pakistan, Roy entered a country he'd wanted to visit for a really long time, India. He crossed into India at the Wagah border and travelled south from Amritsar to New Delhi. His journey took him through Agra, Jaipur, Mumbai, right up till Chennai.
So to Chennai, and I decided there to ship the car to Australia. And whilst the car was at sea, I decided to take 2 weeks vacation in Thailand, and then joined the car in Perth some 2 weeks later. One of the benefits of keeping a blog was that a number of MG enthusiasts around the world had picked up on what I was doing. And one in particular in Australia had emailed me several times saying that if I was going to visit Australia, I had to visit them, etc.
And as luck would have it, when Roy reached Australia, he was in for a very big surprise.
When I arrived in Perth, I actually was met off the plane by 4 MG enthusiasts from the local Perth club, who took me to my hotel, made sure I had everything I needed, and told me how to find the docks where the car would actually enter the city. Now, this was a real surprise, and as it turned out, I found that MG car clubs are in 7 locations over there, including Perth.
Bridget the Midget became a sensation across Britain, and as Roy completed his journey around the world, little did he know that many people were waiting with fanfare to congratulate and welcome him into the country.
Well, when I arrived back, of course, a number of journalists approached me and were talking to me and asking me, "Now that you've done this, what's next?" And I jokingly said, "Well, I didn't go through Africa at all, so perhaps I'll go down there," and dismissed it at the time. But it wasn't long before I was actually thinking, well, why not go to Africa? And why not do a few more trips? So my thoughts certainly went very much that way, and I started to prepare the car for another journey. At the same time, I had a lot of people saying, you have to write down all of the information about your around the world trip. There are people that want to experience what you have experienced, and the only way that they can do so is through your writing a book. So I eventually did that whilst I was preparing the car for another journey. The book I called Not in That Car, which refers back really to the time when my neighbour told me that I could not do this journey in that particular car. I'm now preparing a second car, an MGB, to undertake another journey, hopefully around the world again. Obviously a different route this time.
An MG, an undying spirit, and the love for adventure is all one needs to create a legend that will inspire many future generations.